I'm AJ from ProWritingAid. Thanks for joining for another session of Writing for Effective Leadership, a series which we hold on, usually we hold on the third Wednesday of every month, but this month has been unique, so we're holding it on a Monday. A little bit about me. I've spent over 10 years designing and teaching undergraduate and MBA level writing and communication courses. And in these webinars, I discuss how exceptional writing can boost your business, studies, or career in a practical way. And so today's discussion is really about so what appears to be, in at least some places in the world, a kind of vision of what work might look like post-pandemic. And I want to be really empathetic to the idea that the pandemic is affecting people really differently in different places. So in India, it's really rough right now, and I know in Brazil. So I think it's actually it's an opportunity to be a little bit sensitive to say that we're not over this, and we're not over in the United States, and I know in the UK. But just thinking forward, a lot of people are talking about what the future is going to look like of work, and how are we going to do this, and are we going to let people come back? And in particular, what I'm interested in is this question of, how do we position ourselves individually for our careers to think about what does it mean to look for a job in the COVID era, and how might employers be looking at bringing people on? What are they looking for, and what might be those key things? So here's based off of some of the research and the data that I've collected, here's some ways that I think we can think about our future in work and thinking about our careers. So let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen. And we'll go from there. Okay, so one sort of title that I've given today is just this idea of critical questions and hopefully some answers about the new realities of work. This is a sort of apocryphal quote. We're not totally sure who said it, and there's different versions, but the one that I've heard is from Churchill. And it's this idea that plans are useless, but planning is everything. And I love this. And I think the idea is that many of us have likely done things like, let's say you go on a trip, you visit a new place, and you have very specific plans for what you want to do. But when you get there, the realities on the ground change those plans completely. However, the argument is that you're far better off having planned and changing those plans than you were to not plan at all. And I think this really applies to what life is like and the significant uncertainty and complexity that we're all dealing with. So how can we plan? How can we do planning, but also completely aware that those plans are likely going to fall apart, or we're going to have to change those plans. And so what I think I've observed, and I'm sure many of you observed, whether in your work or even in your personal life, is, as a teacher, I had a meeting recently, and all the teachers at my university are saying, what is the fall going to look like? And we're asking administration, what is the fall going to look like? What is the fall going to look like? And they have no idea. They think they know, but they don't know. And we're having a graduation ceremony for my university. And in the past 3 weeks, they've changed the plans for that 3 times, which I think, again, speaks to this Churchill quote. So again, this is the vibe, the kind of way I want you to be thinking about things. Here we go. So let's plan. What are 3 big insights that we can draw from what thought leaders, researchers, and organizations are saying about work moving forward? One big one, which I think is a great thing, and perhaps was already happening, but is accelerated by COVID, is that mental health and well-being matters. And there's a lot of reasons why we could point to why this is the case, but I think what we're all finding is that whereas work and life was always starting to become more integrated with laptops and phones, and we could work from home and we could work anywhere, I think what the COVID has shown is that now work and life are completely inseparable in working from home. And so it's very hard to disentangle how we're feeling about life and how we're feeling about things from work. And so companies are aware of this, and they're acknowledging it, and they're taking steps to address it and to show that it matters, that they care about their employees' health and well-being. So one study, more than half of Americans report that COVID has negatively affected their mental health, which some of us might go, duh, right? And this is from February of 2021. And then there was a line in a McKinsey report from April 2021 about leadership. And the idea was that leadership needs to be able to convey to their people, look, it's okay to not be okay. Whereas I think historically, this has been something that you had to hide, you couldn't say. But given that everyone's dealing with different things with the pandemic, mental health and well-being are now just in our everyday top of mind. Brene Brown, the famous researcher and TED Talk and scholar, has said this, which I think is really fascinating. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read the key ideas. Is another pandemic is going to follow this one, she says, and it's already started, which is a real mental health pandemic. And we're absolutely in the midst of it. We're all falling apart. And she thinks, which I really like, is she says that I hope the great awakening that follows this is that every one of us depends on each other. And we depend on the systems, which I think are organizations and governmental institutions, but the companies we work for, we depend on the systems that keep us alive and well. And we're only as free and safe as the person next to us. And this is from a Wall Street Journal article 2 weeks ago. And I really, Brene Brown is a major thought leader in the mental health, and, organizations have Brene Brown come speak to their employees. And I think this is a really great point. And that this idea of we have to think about work, and organizations have to think about work about, we can't leave people out on their own anymore. We can't just assume people are okay. And so we do have research too, that shows that companies who do invest in mental health support will benefit. So this is from international research that says that taking such action for individuals' mental health can bolster their mental health and job satisfaction, and it has been shown to be good for business. And that a company can get a 4.25 ROI for every dollar spent. And I think this, again, might have been something that was there prior to COVID, and COVID has accelerated that. So what can companies do? I just think this is an interesting thing. And what are companies being told to do this? What would it look like to invest in mental health? And so this is from a McKinsey article from April 1st from this year. And their ideas, two of them that I want to focus on, they had 5, is one is design workplaces to minimize harm. And again, what does that mean exactly? And they talk about community building. And I think this is huge, right? Is how do we make people feel that they're a part of something? And you have to do, team building exercises, and, whether it's Zoom get-togethers, or, there's lots of different ways to think about this, but you can't just assume that employees are going to feel that they belong or feel that they're a part of a community without actually taking specific steps. Enhanced flexibility, I think, is another thing that you can do to promote people's well-being, is that there just might be times where people are dealing with stuff during the classic 9 to 5 and they just can't do it, but maybe they can work later at night, or maybe they can work on the weekend. And I think being more open to that is key. And then workload monitoring and dynamic rebalancing is I definitely have heard stories of people who feel that because they're working from home, they're actually doing a lot more work. And that can lead to real burnout. And so what these McKinsey authors suggest is you just really need to monitor it and go, wait, is this reasonable? Is this viable? And is this complicating or troubling my mental health? And then the second thing that I wanted to focus on that McKinsey talked about was building individual resilience, which I think is interesting, is literally, rather than just empathizing with employees who might be struggling, you actually give them tools. So resilience training is something that they offer. Mindfulness programs is something that they offer. And then also encouraging physical activity, which, for me with my students, I often say, hey, we've got, 45 more minutes left in class. Let's go think about, I'm going to give you a question and go walk outside for 10 minutes. And I think because we're probably not moving around as much as we did when we were working in an office, being at home. It's just easy to kind of sit at your desk all day. So, all right, the second big thing that we have to think about, and this is what McKinsey and Harvard Business Review have found, is that the future of work is a hybrid virtual model, that we're neither going fully into, we're not going to be a full hybrid, a full virtual workforce, and we're not going to be a full in-person workforce. And so it's going to be a hybrid virtual model. And there's a couple companies in particular, Spotify and Twitter, who've already created a work from anywhere policy so that you do not need to be in San Francisco or wherever it may be, that you can work from anywhere. And so I think this is something that we have to think about, and something I'll talk about a little bit later in the resume. How do you sell yourself to companies that are aware that they're working in a hybrid virtual model, which will mean particular things. So for example, in a hybrid virtual model, if I'm a manager of a team and I have 2 of my team members in person and 3 on Zoom, maybe on a flat screen TV in an office, how do I make sure that the people who are not physically there, who are somewhere else, how do I make them feel as included as the 2 people in my, that are right in front of me? What I'm going to presume too is that when the meeting's over, I'm going to talk with these 2 people in the hallway. We might talk about a particular project. They might become aware of resources or opportunities that I otherwise wouldn't tell the people who were on Zoom, because it's just not this, I didn't think about it. It wasn't that informal moment. So informal moments matter. And what we have to think about with the hybrid virtual model is like, what is that? What does that mean for how are we fair to everyone, especially if you're like Spotify and Twitter and you have a work from anywhere policy? You have to make sure that everyone has equal opportunity to be involved and to be given opportunities. So, and then the other key thing that I think really complicates how we think about work that we need to think about is that the goal right now is to produce work and not simply be at work. And so there's been a lot of discussion of this, that over the past sort of, we started 40, 50, 60, 70 years ago with the idea that you were working when you were physically at your desk. You were showing that you were working when you were in the office. And when you're just online, how do you do that? How do we do that? And one of the arguments is that actually we stop measuring presence. We stop measuring where you are, and we measure what you're producing. And this is tough, right? This is tough. It means that you really have to double down on your processes. And so the focus now is on cognitive input and employee processes, but also organizational processes. And so we have to be aware as individuals, like, how am I working to demonstrate that I'm getting things done, when I can't just show up to the office in a sense. And so Robert Posen, who's a senior lecturer at MIT, says this: people should spend real time figuring out what their goals, priorities, and objectives are, and agree on success metrics on how you can tell after a week or a month whether you have achieved those. And I think that, of course, this is important pre-COVID. We knew that. It's not that pre-COVID you could just simply get away with by showing up. Maybe I did a couple, like with some of my first jobs, I was able to pull that off. But we know that you really need to produce stuff. And so having that idea be an organizing principle of our work in a virtual format is really key. But also, as I'll show, we need to prove to companies that we've been doing that if we want to be hired by them. All right, so what does this all mean for my resume? And the way I think about this is your resume is really the story of who you are, and also your cover letter as well. But I think your resume needs to be this too. But our resumes, I think we can plan and we can anticipate all these things. We know, based off of this research that I found, this is how companies are thinking about these kinds of things. So they're thinking about well-being and mental health. They're thinking about cognitive output and not just sitting in your chair as a way of showing you're working. And they're thinking about, hey, how are we going to handle this when we have 2 people in 2 different time zones and 2 people in person, and we need them all to collaborate equally. So these are the 3 things that we can think of, and we can tweak and we can adapt our resume to think about these things. So I'm going to give you some specific examples. So I truly believe that we really are allowed to be our authentic selves at work more than ever. And I just had on in one of my classes someone from Airbnb, creative director, and he was saying this exact thing: is how, we want people to be themselves because we know they're, not only are they going to do their best work, which is our goal, but how are we going to how are we going to help people be their authentic self so that they stay with us and that they actually enjoy work? This is something that we care about. So I think often what we do in our resume or cover letter is we just don't think deeply enough about being a real human. So I think you need a story at the top of your resume. And I think you need that story to be authentically you. And again, because we know companies now care more about mental health and well-being, we just know that they're more comfortable with people being real and being authentic. All right, so this one is, I think, it toes the line really well, or balances being professional, but also being authentic, right? And so here we go. Aspiring product manager, obsessed with solving multidisciplinary problems that have no simple solutions. Problem solving is both an art and a science, and I've developed my own philosophy as a result of diagnosing, addressing, and solving a range of problems across product teams at several SaaS startups as well as nonprofits. My philosophy of radical collaboration, thoughtful leadership, and obsession with one goal has led to an average product revenue increases of over 40%. And so this is a mix of, this idea of I have a philosophy of radical collaboration and thoughtful leadership. I think problem solving is both an art and a science. I'm obsessed with solving multidisciplinary problems. This makes us come across as a real human. And I think this is what we all need to do is, what do you love about work? What do you love about your industry? Or what do you love about your subject matter that and really focus on that to convey that to companies, because this is who they want. They really want you to be your authentic self. I know that might sound cliche, but it's true. Okay, so given that we need to prove that we can get things done, it's never been more important, but it was important pre-COVID, is that we have to use data to show that we've gotten things done. And so what I often tell my students when I read their resumes is they're often very good at telling people in a resume, in their resume, they tell a potential employer what they've done, but they do not sell what they've done. And to sell what you've done, you need your bullet points in your resume to show that you solved a problem. And if you can create quantifiable, and this is tough, I know, but if you can create quantifiable evidence of an improvement or of a problem solved, you're just going to be far more compelling and far more persuasive. So here's some examples of using data to show how you solved a problem. So designed and implemented knowledge management system for a new product team that saved $110,000 on overall project through a 20% decrease in team member allocation time. Here's another one. Oversaw root cause analysis of project management inefficiencies that increased client satisfaction 30% and increased overall portfolio revenue by 17%. So data is very powerful, but also you can kind of see that in an era when people are going to be saying, all right, you're not in an office, so what are we getting done? If you can provide data and if you can prove that you have a track record of getting things done, you're going to be more compelling and you're going to be more persuasive in your resume and both in your cover letter. Okay. So lastly, I truly believe that you're going to need to prove and convey that you know how to work really well on teams in the new hybrid virtual format. And I think this is something that many employers are looking for, and they don't perhaps know that they're looking for it. And here's one reason I'll say this, is that currently there are no experts on, there's a few, right? But there's no internal team specifically tasked with making sure that, the hybrid virtual format, or even just right now, the virtual format is working for everyone. I believe, there might be some companies who've said, hey, we need to create a separate unit that is going around to all the individual groups and making sure that, everyone feels that they're heard, or everyone feels that they're being engaged, and everyone feels that they belong. But I would argue right now, the responsibility for working well in a Zoom format is falling on everyone's shoulders, that even the manager is not singularly responsible for that. To me, what this kind of vague distributed responsibility reality means, the idea that no one's really in charge of making sure that everyone's working well together in this Zoom format, to me, what it means is that you will want to prove, you will see this as an opportunity, right? And you will talk about it in your resume, how you personally have become a problem solver in this space of the Zoom format, right? And so I think for me, just to give an example, as a teacher, I think that what's happening is that a lot of people, a lot of teachers who are finding the past year on Zoom to be going okay is because they've come up with their own solutions. Excuse me, and they're not just asking IT, or maybe they are asking others, but by thinking not just I need to do Zoom, but thinking as I'm doing Zoom, I need to develop new strategies and new processes, because I'm learning what's working, what's not working. So for me, for example, I've learned to embrace with my students the chat feature on Zoom, and I learned to not just ignore it, but to really kind of check it out and to say, all right, what is everyone saying? I want to see what's going on. That's one example. And for you personally, I think you'll want to think about, I need to be able to explain how I've adapted from a work perspective and from a collaboration perspective. How have I adapted to the new norms of the pandemic work style? And how am I unique? How can I differentiate myself? How can I use this as a selling point? I truly believe companies will go, wow, like if you could come up with ideas to help us work better together, that's great, because we just don't know. We're still figuring this out. So to me, this is a real opportunity. And I think if you put it in your resume, you're going to differentiate yourself from people who aren't talking about this. So my view is this is sort of thinking ahead of the companies, thinking about something that they don't know that they should be thinking about, but they will ultimately. So here's two examples. Developed and implemented team collaboration system among 30 associates across 4 time zones that increased team member satisfaction by 22% through a codified remote work manual. So maybe you came up with a remote work manual and said, hey, here's some not rules, but here's some ways of thinking about how we're all going to work together, just so that we all kind of have a shared understanding. And hey, maybe you want to share, maybe you want to edit this and come up with your own ideas too. Next is organized over 75 town hall meetings that increased organizational participation by 35% in 6 months. And so again, maybe you came up with this idea of a town hall meeting for your team because you found, that there was a sense of everyone feeling really disconnected, and that you also wanted to have that town hall meeting where people didn't really feel like they had to necessarily come up with ideas for kind of a classic meeting, but they could just ask questions about things and just make it kind of light, like a town hall meeting. And then you got, maybe you got more people to get involved in these. And this is maybe a tool or a solution that you want to bring to the next organization that you work for. So my argument here, hopefully that I've been making very clear, is that I do believe you should have your resume reflect our new realities. That if your resume still applies to a pre-COVID, a 2019 work landscape, you're missing out on some opportunities to say to organizations and companies, hey, I am flexible and I have been thinking about all these things. And to me, these are 3 ways that you can do it, because these 3 ideas come out of what the research and what companies are saying and what places like The Economist and Wall Street Journal and Harvard Business Review and McKinsey are saying. So, and then lastly, I on my last slide, I had the at first I thought, how do I want to end this? And I was going to say something like, we just need to become comfortable being uncomfortable. And I just thought of all of you going, that just sounds kind of ridiculous right now. As if we all haven't learned how to do that for the past year. And so maybe if there were any way that I wanted to end on this, is just this idea that, we don't know. We just don't know right now. And no one knows. And I don't know. And, it's kind of almost a mantra, I don't know. But if we pair this with idea of this idea, I don't know, but if we pair it with let's plan and let's be comfortable giving up those plans, but let's plan, I think this is one way to make this overall horrible, very difficult, complex issue a bit more manageable, and maybe ideally find a little light in all of it. Maybe okay, I feel more confident in a way because I am planning. So All right, well, I'm going to stop sharing. I think, and I'd love to hear from any of you in the Q&A. I think someone raised their hand, and if you wanted to write, let's see here, if you wanted to write any questions you might have in the Q&A, even a comment, I would love to hear from all of you. Maybe a question I would have for all of you is, have you updated your resume yet for a kind of post-pandemic or the new realities of work? And maybe if anyone wants to share something that they've said, I did this because, that we didn't talk about today. I would love to hear from anyone. So if you want to, post a question in the Q&A. Great. So floating gold, thanks for your comment. You say, it's okay to say you don't know, but that doesn't mean that we should, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't plan and do. And I think that's the case. I literally had this experience, and, sometimes it's just, you assume everyone is feeling or thinking. And then when I say everyone, kind of like maybe people who are making, decision makers and whatnot at an organizational level, you assume that they do know. And I genuinely feel, and this is what I just heard from, an administrator at my university who I thought he just said it well. He's like, we just don't know. And it's almost as if we can't know. And so I think there's almost just a little bit of just realizing that it's not that we haven't been given information, or it's not that we know when we'll know. It's just literally just because things are, changing so much, that it's okay to just say we don't know, but we'll plan. And then we'll be okay giving up those plans. Anyone else have a question or a comment about this? Or perhaps there's other areas of kind of COVID or our lives and work. Okay, so it's a great question about what are your thoughts on the personalizing storytelling of resumes, even with the current version of companies using software and algorithms to sorting and selecting resumes. So this is an awesome question, and I think I'm also going to restate it in a way that I think is kind of the idea is, how do I blend being me, but also just literally making sure that the company will select my resume. What I really recommend with this, and this is almost an entirely other webinar that we do sometimes, is we say, you look very, very closely at the job description. And there's a couple ways to do this. One is you underline any words or phrases that keep getting repeated. So this says, this is what this company really cares about. There's a job description, it might have 500 words or 1,000 words, but that doesn't mean that all of those words are equally important. And so, whether it's decision making or, problem solving, whether it's a technical thing like Python or something, you really need to be aware of okay, if I had to reduce this entire job description down to 3 or 4 things, here's what they really care about. We call this linguistic mirroring. Actually, it's this idea that you pick up the language of the person you're trying to engage with. So you want to pick up the language of the company that you want to work for, and you want to kind of repeat it back to them in your own way. So what I would do is just first make sure that you are echoing back to them what you believe to be are the 3 to 4 key terms in the job description. Then you can, then you think about your story. Because I think they'll get, that's how you make sure you get picked, but then also then you become different. And, I often, this will all vary, with all of you in the industries you're interested in, or, whatever jobs you want to have. But I often ask students, how many people will be applying for the job that you want? And the lowest number I often hear is 100 or 200. And so I just always say to them, you've got to differentiate yourself. You're going to be competing with 200 people. How will you separate yourself? And I would argue you separate yourself by being you, by being quirky, by being unique, by being funny, by, in your own mode, just really figuring out how am I different than other people? Or so. But that's a great question about the resume. So hit the keywords, make sure you hit those, and then continue to provide your story, whether it's the story at the top of the resume, which I think is really important, or, also as well as in your cover letter. So Sonia, I believe I'm getting your name correctly. Sonia says, any suggestions on how to sell yourself to a potential employer when you've been out of work for the past year due to an industry shutdown and convention? So one thing I think about, and Sonia, is this idea of, kind of do what I would suggest, like an audit of who you are and what you were doing when you were doing the conventions. So, what skill set, what abilities were you bringing to your work at those conventions? And think about them, like, if you can, you almost want to separate them out of like convention specific things. So think about things like project management, think about things like team management, think about things like logistics. And then maybe what you want to kind of consider is how can I find those abilities or spaces in other industries, or for new employers. So let's say maybe you're trying to not necessarily leave the convention space, or the in-person kind of event space, because who knows that industry might be in a tough spot for a little bit. You want to go into something different. Well, the idea is that if you emphasize not like the convention aspects of your work, but the people aspect, the communications that you did, maybe the team management that you did, the problem solving that you did, the logistics, whatever it may be, that will help this new industry, this new company see you in that light. I guess the other thing, and I'm always reluctant to say things like this during a pandemic, but on LinkedIn, there are lots of certifications and courses that you can do. Again, I'm very reluctant to say this to people too sometimes, but if you could even get like, a part-time job, working in a new industry, or even in worst case scenarios, you offer, if possible, you offer to work maybe for free for like 4 hours a week, just so that you can, use it as a story to say, I've been learning about X, or I've been, exploring this, and I've learned, about this industry. I think the idea is that you want to show them that you're, in being out of work, which again, I want to empathize with, is a super stressful, very difficult thing, but that you've been learning, right, and growing despite all this to a certain degree. And so a tough one for sure. But the other thing I want to say to Sonia as well, and I really believe this, is that, so I'm 41, and I just think about when I got out of college in 2002, it was a really different world in terms of, it was still the premise that you should stay at one company for a while, and you shouldn't move around a lot because it doesn't look good on your resume. But I really believe nowadays that, you really, not only is it good to change jobs, again, at whatever pace you're up for, but, and as long as you think, the idea would be to change a job when you feel like you can stop growing at one. But it's the norm now to move across industries and to bring your skill set from one industry to another. And I think this is how innovation happens too, So I feel like a lot of times I might have, students or MBA students who say, it's a big leap. And I'll say, no, this is a natural leap. This is the dynamic modern economy that we live in, where things are constantly changing. So you should change industries, or you should be up for it. Okay, let me see in the chat. We've got some interesting things here. So R. Cheeseman said, I'm retired, but write to others. So how do I understand how others are receiving? And I think what you're maybe saying is, how are other people receiving my writing and what I'm saying? And, I thought about this so much recently. And so to R. Cheeseman too, what I guess I recommend is, what I really recommend is going far outside your normal zone of like any cultural production artifacts that you would normally watch. So, I know it sounds funny, but like, it depends on who you're writing to. So if you find that you're writing to young adults, like, right now, really figuring out what are the spaces that young adults hang out in? Is it TikTok? Is it Clubhouse? And I realize I'm getting farther and farther from understanding my students, and that means I need to do more and more work about where they're at and how they're interpreting things. So I think it's a constant sort of self-teaching of, all right, who's my audience that I'm writing to, and where are the spaces that they hang out in, and I need to go hang out in those spaces. So with my university, there's a kind of informal student Facebook page that anybody can join, and because the students are all writing and posting memes on there, and I've joined it. And it sounds weird maybe, but I joined it because I want to see what they're talking about and how they think about things and how are they relating to one another. And so it helps me when I'm teaching to know, like, you know, it sounds funny, but I'm like, I'll use a meme because they use memes with each other. So if I'm trying to explain something, I'll use a meme. And you know, just small things like that. So yeah, so there, I also want to, Michelle and Theodore bring up some interesting points that you know, I really want to emphasize. I'm not a work expert. You know, I'm not aware of kind of like, you know, exactly the numbers on all these kinds of things. But Michelle brings up the point, which I think is always the case, is just differentiation and really thinking deeply. And it's hard. It's super hard work, but really thinking deeply about, like, you know, what am I good at? And, you know, there's a kind of the line of like, what's my superpower? But it's just more, you know, what do I get excited about? And what do I do? What do I do in a way that this almost feels effortless? And like, how can I wrap that up? You know, what, like, how am I different than other people? And it's tough. It's very tough. And it's something you just kind of ongoing, you keep working on. So, all right. Well, there are no more questions. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate these webinars, and I really think that ProWritingAid is a community, and I see some returning people. And you know, I always love hearing from you in the chat, in the Q&A. So thank you again for joining. You will get a replay of this, and let's just continue this discussion with these webinars each month. And have a wonderful morning, afternoon, night, late night, wherever you are. So thanks.